I will now turn to Executive Director Alice Stebbins, who will introduce the speaker that we will have today on item 43, the Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan, Implementation Status Update. Alice?
Thank you, President Batcher. For item 43, I would like to introduce Monica Palmera. She is the Senior Community Engagement Liaison based in the News and Outreach Office. She manages the implementation of the Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan. She will provide a status report to us on implementation of the plan, which, as you know, requires the support of the whole CPUC. Monica?
All right. Can you all hear me?
We can.
All right, great. And then just one more logistical item. Can you see slide 18, which is the cover slide for the presentation? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Okay, my live feed is a little delayed, so that's helpful. Well, thank you so much, Commissioners. Really appreciate your time and attention to the Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan, or ESJ Action Plan. I know we're deep into the lunch hour right now, so I will do my best to go through this expeditiously. So today, just going to give you an update on where we are on implementation. The slide should say May 2020 status update rather than April. And just want to acknowledge that there were a lot of people that worked really hard to put this status update together. But for technical ease, you'll just be hearing from me today. So we'll go ahead and dive in. I'll give you an overview of the plan, how we're setting up an implementation structure internally at the PUC, also some highlights of what's been done so far to implement the plan, and talk a little bit about where we hope to go in the coming months. So with that, I'll go ahead and go to next slide. All right, so about the ESJ Action Plan, just as a refresher, this plan was formally adopted by the Commission in February of 2019, so just a little over a year ago. And it really provides a comprehensive framework that outlines how the CPUC will address issues of environmental and social justice. Up until this point, up until the plan was adopted, issues were being addressed, certainly being addressed on a program by program or proceeding by proceeding basis. But I think it was widely acknowledged that, we had communities and people knocking on our door and helping us to acknowledge that we have a big role to play. The decisions that we make affect the livelihoods and the lives directly of communities in California. And so what this plan does is outlines an overarching philosophy for how we plan to address issues of environmental and social justice, and actually puts concrete steps in place for us to do so. Next slide should be on slide 20. So now just very quickly want to highlight the 9 goals that are outlined in the plan. First is to consistently integrate equity and access considerations into CPUC proceedings. We want to increase investment in clean energy resources, try to improve access to water, communications, and transportation services, increase climate resiliency, enhance outreach and public participation such that environmental and social justice communities can participate in their processes in a meaningful way. We want to enhance enforcement to ensure safety and consumer protection. We're looking to promote economic and workforce development opportunities where we can within our authorities. We want to improve staff and opportunities for staff to receive training on issues related to environmental and social justice so that we as staff are well equipped to handle issues as they arise. And then also monitor our efforts, so evaluate and monitor how we're doing so that we can continue to improve upon our actions. Next slide should be slide 21. So in the plan, underneath those 9 overarching goals, there are 95 discrete action items. We have counted every single one. And I must say, I have had the chance to work on similar plans at other agencies, and I believe this one is one of the most concrete and tangible plans to implement equity considerations that I've seen in an agency. So I think it's really robust and does a good job. The action items are spread out across the Commission, across our division. So we have a lot of action items in the Energy Division, in Communications, in Consumer Protection, as well as in the News and Outreach Office where I sit. And I'm happy to report that progress has been made on all 95 action items. And we've developed a system to systematically track our progress on these action items, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. And linked, I think, on the agenda and also available on our webpage about the Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan, you can find a full status report that gives you a status update on each of those 95 action items. So if folks want to really dive into the meat of how we're doing on implementing these actions, that report is now available. I'll just, a little later in the presentation, I'll just highlight a few for you commissioners. Next slide would be slide 22. So in terms of implementing this plan, again, it was adopted a little over a year ago in February 2019. We've been spending the last several months creating an infrastructure internally such that we can cross the entire commission and systematically track how we're doing as far as implementation. So the way we're structured to do this is that we have established a core team that spearheads implementation across the board. That consists of a lead from the News and Outreach Office, which is myself. I've also had the great fortune to work very closely with key advisors from Commissioner Rechtschaffen and Commissioner Guzman Estevez's offices. As was acknowledged in the public comment, you both were spearheaded this effort. And so I've been working with Sarah Sharp, Nicole Cropper, and Julia Schmidt. And together we coordinate across the commission on how implementation is going. So we consider ourselves the core team. But what I'm most excited to present to you all is that we have established environmental and social justice liaisons in each of the divisions at the CPUC. So every division across all of our diverse industry areas has a person who is tasked with, sort of the more task-oriented work of tracking our statuses, how we're doing on each of the action items, but also serving as an ambassador in their division for environmental and social justice issues. So really taking up the mantle of understanding these issues and understanding how they're playing out in their division. So we've done that across all our divisions. And one thing that we also want to do in addition to just having these liaisons is actually convene the group. So we've had a couple of meetings since January of 2020. Our first one was in January. And we as the core team convened the ESJ liaisons so that we can get together, so we can actually talk about these issues, create a culture around how we address these issues, and very importantly, share lessons learned. Sometimes at the commission, it can be hard to get together folks that work on different industry areas. There isn't always a lot of space for telecommunications, to talk to energy, to talk to rail safety. And we want to create a space where we can share what's worked and what hasn't as far as addressing these issues, and so that we can learn from each other. That's something that we're really, really excited about and look to continue moving forward. And then I will say that the ESJ liaisons were instrumental in gathering all of the status updates that are in the report that's posted online. All right, next slide should be slide 23. So as far as where we are in implementing the plan, just going to highlight some key actions thus far. So many of the action items allude to specific proceedings and proceeding processes. And a few of these that are here on the slide have some exciting new developments that are related to environmental and social justice. One is the wildfire mitigation plan proceeding. We did a lot of work there to really encourage the utilities to do much more robust outreach in language to communities. And actually the picture that you see here on this slide is of a panel that we had at the workshop about wildfire mitigation plans that was made up of representatives of folks living in rural communities, working with farm worker communities, and folks who speak indigenous languages who had experienced hardship in previous wildfires. And so they were able to help us understand what are the language needs of these hard-to-reach communities. And we were able to incorporate a lot of their suggestions and recommendations into requirements now for wildfire mitigation, which we're really excited about, setting a new precedent for utilities to really understand what languages are in their community and work to reach those folks effectively in the case of a wildfire. Additionally, in the climate adaptation proceeding, there's a lot of really good work going on to define climate vulnerability. This is a really important topic in environmental and social justice communities because how climate change is going to affect frontline communities is something that requires a lot of thought and care. And so to develop a definition of vulnerability and to understand how utilities will work with these communities as they plan for the impacts of climate change is very important. So a lot of really good work happening in that space. Additionally, in the affordability proceeding, this is a once in a nation-leading proceeding that's looking at how can we better understand the impacts of rate increases on a variety of households, particularly how it's going to impact low-income households. and their budgets and all the things that they have to consider. So there's some really exciting work going on in that proceeding. And then, in the mobile home park upgrade program, for example, that program is putting higher prioritization on disadvantaged communities, making sure investments go to those communities. And that's exactly the kind of work we want to see happen as this plan is being implemented. All right, next slide should be on slide 24. So one of the very, very big action items in the plan, or action item 1.1 and 1.2, which is to incorporate environmental and social justice impacts into our decisions and resolutions. So much like we consider safety considerations, we want to start getting into a practice where we think about what are the impacts of the decisions that we're making on environmental and social justice communities. So in terms of systematizing that and moving forward with that action item, the ALJ division is the lead on that action item, and we're working very closely with them to understand how can we start incorporating this into proceeding processes. Because we have such a diversity of proceedings with such a diversity of issue areas, we're piloting how we might do this in two proceedings. First in the CARE ESA low-income programs and the energy division, as well as we're looking to identify a rail crossing proceeding to also pilot how we might consider ESJ impacts in that process. The goal of that is that we learn some important lessons through that such that we can create guidance that would apply across our industry areas. And I'll also say while we're working on these pilot proceedings, concurrently we're also conducting some research on best practices of how other agencies are doing this very work, how they are evaluating environmental and social justice impacts, how they're able to incorporate it into their decision making. And we're starting to work on general guidance that we think could be implemented to further this action item, in addition to piloting it in the proceedings. Okay, next slide. So I'm on slide 25. And then also another big part of the ESJ plan is to really increase participation of stakeholders in our processes. We have a lot of different ways people can get involved, but often it requires a certain level of expertise or involvement, and we really want to do our best to have an open door to folks that haven't historically been a part of our processes. So some of the actions that we've taken now on the docket card for our proceedings, there's the opportunity to provide public comment there. So if folks aren't able to come to our meetings or come to our hearings, they can submit public comment through there, and it's very easily accessible. Also, we're conducting a lot more robust outreach to community-based organizations on the ground and really encouraging folks to get involved in proceedings or come to hearings so that we can understand how some of our decisions are playing out on the ground and how we can be better informed in our decision-making. We're also starting to do tours and meetings as a part of off-site voting meetings. So when you commissioners are traveling for these meetings, and hopefully we'll get to do that again at some point, trying to organize local community visits and tours so that while we're out in the community, we take advantage of that time and that travel to meet on the ground with folks and get to know people's lived experiences. And we're also doing a lot of work to just simply update our collateral materials, make sure they're written in an accessible way, as well as updating our website so that people can find us and find our work more effectively. Next slide, slide 26. And then lastly, we are really working to ramp up training and staff development on these issue areas. We were able to be a part of a state agency collaborative that put together a community engagement and outreach training back in March. So we worked with folks like Cal EPA, the Air Resources Board, State Lands Commission, and others to train state agency staff on community engagement and outreach. And I'm proud to report CPUC, we had over 20 people show up. We had the most representation of any other state agency. So we were really excited about that and hope to bring that training in-house so that we can extend that opportunity to more staff. We're also looking to bring training on Cal EnviroScreen, which is a really helpful mapping tool to identify environmental and social justice communities, or rather, I should say, disadvantaged communities. And then we'll also be a part of, moving forward, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. So we will have a CPUC cohort going through racial equity training and actually creating a racial equity plan for how we improve upon those issues at the PUC. So all of that is happening in the midst of work that people are doing on a daily basis. All right, next slide. Slide 27. So gave you all the good news. It wouldn't be right to not talk about some challenges that we face. One of the big challenges in embarking on implementing this plan is simply building awareness that the plan exists. So a lot of the work thus far has been about introducing the plan to staff, making staff aware of all the definitions that are in there, all of the action items that are in there, and so that staff can start to use it and cite it in decisions and in programs and in advice letters and whatnot. So for example, for our ESJ liaisons, for many of them, when they were identified as an ESJ liaison, we introduced them to the plan for the first time. And then they had to go into their divisions and do the hard work to actually educate their colleagues about the plan such that they could get status updates for this report. So that kind of web, that kind of network work is happening now, but it does take some time. But we're really committed to that, and we want to really build knowledge on definitions and best practices internally at the Commission. But it has been something that's just been taken time and something we continue to work on. The other big thing that we think is an opportunity and what we'd really like to focus on moving forward is doing a better job of collecting metrics and data related to ESJ issues. So the status report offers a lot of general updates on where the action items are as far as being implemented. But what we really want to do moving forward is really hone in on what are the specific updates or what's really happening from an ESJ perspective on that action item, and start looking at data across our action items so that we can compare our, start to understand our impact a little bit better, but also compare our programs and processes a little bit so that we can understand really where we're going. So what are some metrics we want to start collecting across programs, and how do we do a better job of evaluating where we are? We recognize this is a place we have a lot of growing to do, and we look forward to looking to what other state agencies have done and what communities recommend so we can do a little bit better job with that moving forward. I'm almost done. Next slide. So in terms of timeline and next steps, where we are. So we were able to give the Disadvantaged Community Advisory Group of the CPUC a version of this presentation earlier in April. So they are in the loop of what we're doing with the plan. They were really big stakeholders in the creation of the plan, and it's really important that we stay committed to having them involved in the implementation. And then coming up, what I'll talk about is an update to the plan. What we're going to be doing moving forward, we're going to continue convening the ESJ liaisons, hopefully on a monthly basis, to have conversation and provide training where we can. And what we're really looking towards is February 2021. That would be 2 years since the plan was adopted. The plan does call for an update every 2 years. So leading up to February 2021, we will be starting conversations about where can we go with this plan? Where can we go with the goals of this plan within our division? And how can we push ourselves to go further and to do more, to do right by environmental and social justice communities? So we're already starting to talk to our liaisons about what action items they think could be incorporated into the plan in an update. And we also will likely do some kind of public workshop in the fall so that we can involve the public in that conversation as well. And we will return to you in February 2021 with a new plan. All right, next slide. All right, thank you very much. So this would be slide 29. This is a picture of our ESJ liaisons. Again, just want to thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions about where we are on implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. That was terrific. Very informative and very helpful. So I'll turn to the commissioners. Does anyone have any questions of Monica or of the great work that the team is doing?
I have, waving my hand. Thank you, Monica. I really appreciate that presentation. You all have done a lot of work, and I like the effort to make sure you're quantifying all of the action items and, keeping us updated on the status. I think that's an excellent way to really be intentional about implementing this plan. I did have one question about the pilots for the proceedings and incorporating environmental justice issues in proceedings. I guess I was sort of thinking at the time we passed the plan that our goal in terms of incorporating these issues into proceedings would be a little more ambitious. I think of a pilot program as kind of a way to bite off small chunks and gather data. But as you mentioned, our proceedings are cross a lot of different issues, a lot of different industries, and they're very complex. So I'm not sure what the data gathering benefit of a pilot would be. And I guess I was looking for a little bit more of a kind of way to incorporate environmental justice issues into all of our proceedings and sort of figure out how to do that at a time when an OIR is drafted, at a time when scoping memos are prepared. So I guess I would just like, maybe we could have a little more engagement with ALJ division about a way to broaden that effort to be a little more cross-cutting.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think we're trying to figure out how fast we can go with implementing this, because we're thinking about issue areas that are so diverse. We wanted to get our feet wet a little bit on that first. But like I mentioned, we are starting to do some, quite a bit of research on best practices, and even starting to put down some guidance that we think could serve as sort of an overarching guidance for when proceedings are started, for example, at the scoping memo phase, a list of questions that would be asked that would prompt ALJ and commission offices to think about the right kinds of questions that need to be asked and incorporated into a proceeding. So we're kind of moving on both fronts, and happy to talk more about if we want to accelerate that process or try to get to that guidance a little faster. I'm happy to consider that.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up with you offline.
Great.
Awesome.
Any other comments or questions from our, yes, Commissioner Guzman Ochoa.
Thank you. And thank you, Monica, for the presentation. It is really exciting to see the engagement from so many pieces of the organization and so much leadership taking place by the liaisons. Ted, maybe it's an overlap with Commissioner Randolph's question and how we can kind of further this a little bit. Although I do want to acknowledge that I think the pilots are a great, certainly it's not a great start, a great place to continue. And I just noticed that in some of the comments describing the progress in the Excel that you referenced on the action plan progress, some of the descriptions updating the progress, and I don't want to really call anybody out there, so I'll try to be clear, seem to still lack basic understanding of what a disproportionate impact is to a community that is already cumulatively burdened by pollution and poverty. And so I wonder, in the training that we're doing, we've talked a lot about the outreach training and participation on that, which is fantastic, and I certainly have seen a huge amount of progress in that area. But on the kind of analytical side of our policies, is perhaps this is a training that you're already considering, and even maybe it could be coupled with this overarching guidance that you'll be providing folks. Maybe you can couple it with a training to really start to understand that we're not just looking at, this whole notion of equity versus equality. That if our decisions are leading to certain facilities that are polluting across the state, and everyone has an equal share of that pollution, is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is one more of those facilities in an already impacted community is creating an equity issue. And so I guess the question is, can we please try to incorporate some training on environmental justice in any of these actions that you're moving forward on that are going to touch upon the different divisions within the commission?
Yes, absolutely. I think just going back to some of the descriptions and the status updates, I mean, we are learning as we go, and certainly, we asked for a status update, and that's what we got, was a status update on where things were in the particular action item. So I think one even just lesson learned as we move this forward is certainly, to your point, like, how do we prompt for more information about the ESJ impacts in particular? So that's something we definitely learned through this process. But you're absolutely right, and it kind of ties back to what I was talking about, the work that our ESJ liaisons had to do when they were turning to their colleagues to ask about where these action items were. It was explaining the plan to start and what these issues are, and it was like our liaisons are starting to take on that task of articulating what cumulative impacts mean and things like that. So we do have a good bit of work to do to sort of systematize knowledge on what these kinds of things mean. One way we wanted to start, and I flashed it up earlier, is even with a training on the tool of CalEnviroScreen. A lot of folks at the Commission work with that tool, but a lot of folks don't and aren't aware of it and aren't aware of how it measures cumulative impacts in communities from an environmental and socioeconomic framework. So that's something we would actually open up to the whole Commission so that we can start to have that conversation and make those opportunities available. Obviously, to know how to use a tool like CalEnviroScreen, but also to start asking the right questions of, how might this impact communities in different geographies, or how might this play out differently in different places? We know we have a lot of work to do to get that conversation going on a staff level, but I appreciate that you mentioned it could be coupled with the guidance that would be a part of the proceedings. I hadn't thought about it. We hadn't thought about it quite that way. But yeah, that is work that we want to do. Is just trying to figure out the best way to do that across the Commission is what we'll be exploring. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Rick Chauvin.
Thank you. I had just a couple of things I wanted to add. First, I agree with Commissioner Randolph and about the desirability of accelerating our efforts to identify environmental and social justice issues in proceedings or resolutions, and hopefully we can find a way to do that, take the lessons from the pilot or best practices that you're examining. And I'd certainly be happy to work with you, or my office to work with you, to help develop a standard checklist, even if it's an interim checklist that could be used both by ALJ and industry divisions, so that we can get that review, that screening in place sooner rather than later. That's first. I more broadly, I want to thank you, Monica, for the great job you've done for leading our efforts to implement the plan. I'm delighted we've made progress on so many things, many big things, many small things. It takes a lot of coordination and communication and effort to work with everybody. I want to thank the industry liaisons for their time and effort and for you identifying them. That's the way something like this really makes progress. I thank you for identifying Nicole Cropper and Julia Schmidt and Sarah Sharp in my office and Commissioner Guzman-Estevez's office. It's been an excellent team working on this, and look forward to the update in 2021. I do want to report one other big area where we're making progress on, which I learned about this week, is one of the action items calls for a partnership with the Workforce Development Board and a memorandum of understanding with them to develop workforce development standards for different areas within the Commission's jurisdiction. And we have a draft now with the agency that's working its way through industry divisions, legal, and we'll be seeing that coming forward to the other commissioners soon. So that's another area of very significant progress. Thanks.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Sharona.
Yes, thank you, President Badger. I'm also adding my thanks to Monica and the team, and appreciation that the CARE ESA proceeding will be one of the front and center pilot programs. And while any of us may think that CARE ESA is already one of the core programs, that we do towards, for many years now, addressing the issues of low-income communities and environmental and social justice communities, that there is still so much more we can learn and we can do. And some of these criteria that are included really are going to be important in terms of providing for work, improving training and staff development, promoting economic and workforce development, and thinking about the ESA part of that program, and really looking at to ensure that we are not allowing any sort of implicit bias, which I don't think just into our teams at the CPUC in terms of how low-income communities are provided for. I think back on my own experience as a kid through the various public assistance programs of providing monies for families like ours to buy food, and then the food stamp program, and the stigmas that can occur with such programs, where low-income families can really feel that they're being looked down upon. Anyways, I look forward to working with the ESJ team on CARE ESA. And then really one other question, Monica. In the spreadsheet, there were a couple of boxes. One of them had to do with tribal outreach and one with Lifeline, but it's saying that more guidance is needed. And I just wondered if you could clarify guidance from the commission, guidance from the management team, or guidance from the community. Well, where is that guidance needed?
It might be best if I get back to you on specific action items. That it would be great if I could loop back with our folks communications team. I don't want to speak for folks, and again, sort of hindering the process with not having them on the line right now. So I just want to put a pin in those questions, just because I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I will follow up with that. And just wanted to thank you, Commissioner Sharoma, for lifting up that we do have these robust public purpose programs and have a long history and long track record of doing a lot of good in those programs. I think we want to build on that strong foundation and just really start to understand the impact of those programs on different kinds of communities. Just taking a more nuanced lens as to, okay, it's great that we offer these programs. Who is getting them? Who's not getting them? How do we maybe take it to the next step? So I appreciate you highlighting that. And I promise I'll get back to you on those specific questions related to Lifeline, and I think you said tribal outreach. I'll follow up.
All right, thank you.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions of Monica? Well, again, Monica, thank you so much for the presentation, and I echo the words of my fellow commissioners on their gratitude and thoughts and thankfulness that the program is doing as well as it is, and we all stand ready to help you with further implementation. So thank you again for the update,